Previously on The Outsider.
This guy has murdered a child. We got a slew of witnesses. Prints, DNA.
Did you kill my son?
Is that not Terry Maitland? On the same day, 70 miles away. Poof. Terry Maitland's prints from the Babcock, prints from the crime scene. They all match. He can't have been in two places at once. We've got a videotape and witnesses. What we've got beats what they've got. If Terry Maitland is in this, we're not done.
Jessa.
No! He was here. He was saying bad things to me.
It's like he's begging us to catch him. What kind of criminal does that?
Do you think Terry Maitland killed that boy?
I really don't know.
Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of Talking the Outsider. I am one of your hosts, Kinte, all the way live from Los Angeles, California, and I'm so happy to be here with you. And I'm joined by my wonderful and talented co-host, the one and only Jen.
Hey, it's kind of exciting. You know, something that I wanted to bring up right off the top was that HBO decided to broadcast both the first episode of Outsider, Fish in a Barrel, along with the second episode, Roanoke, right after the other, which is atypical because usually a pilot is just a pilot. But in this case, we kind of got 2 for 1 on the same night. And what that did, I think, and we'll get into it as we talk about this episode, is it really hooked the viewers in to something a little bit more meaty than just sort of leaving it on the open end. We got to see the sort of the Terry Maitland piece come to its full fruition as it kind of affected Ralph and then set Ralph up for a later time. In fact, the first episode, Fish in a Barrel, speaks to how incredibly strong and bulletproof he thought his case, Ralph's case, was against Terry, like shooting fish in a barrel. And as we move into Roanoke, you know, clearly there's a lot more questions, bigger questions, perhaps things that really don't make sense, things that just have to be accepted because you know that this is what it is, but what's really happening.
Yeah. And one thing too, I love the titles of these episodes too, because they really kind of give you an idea of the mindset behind the themes of each episode.
Right.
So, I don't know if we need to go into Roanoke and the disappearance and all of that kind of stuff, but you know, just check out.
Let's just say that there's a lot of unanswered questions. And
Right.
That, I think, is what Roanoke is all about. It's all the unanswered questions. We don't know what happened. It's a mystery.
A mystery wrapped in a conundrum.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's get to this episode. Very early on in this episode, we start to find that our main protagonist, that's Detective Ralph Anderson, is starting to have some questions of his own. And, you know, he's not quite sure. You know, one moment he was sure that he had the right man, obviously, because of the steps that he took to bring him in and whatnot. But now he's starting to have some doubts that he did the right thing. So very early on in this episode, we have a meeting between both Ralph and Terry. And I think this is very significant because it kind of lays out his mindset, and he really wants to kind of look at him eye to eye to get an idea of whether or not that he believes him. You know, use his cop gut. Now, just to use the whole book versus TV show thing is, in the novel, his wife, Jeannie Anderson, was the one that told him to do this.
Right.
she said, you know what? You need to look him in his eye. And this is like a big deal because one thing is if you're up for a crime, you should not meet, especially you're already in jail. You should not meet with the person that's trying to put you in jail without your attorney, right?
Right.
And then also the DA doesn't want, after they get to this point, they don't want their detectives doing this as well. So this is like a big meeting, between the two. So I don't want to say compare it to Heat, the that scene, but it's a very significant scene. What do you think about this scene?
Yeah, I think it's very significant too. It's almost like Ralph is trying to look into the eyes of what he believes is the monster while having these very nagging doubts about about whether what he first believed was true or not. And we talked about this in our premiere episode with the book. It continues to be a recurring thing here. Ralph is very much a cop's cop. He's a detective who is very much a cop. He is following a kind of very set in stone evidence based procedure for understanding reality. And we're beginning to realize that both things not only can't be true, but that Ralph is going to have to come to some kind of understanding himself about what is really happening and how to reconcile it in his own head. And I don't feel like in this episode, I don't feel like he's really doesn't feel to me like he's convinced one way or another whether it is Terry or whether it's not Terry. Like I still think that he has lingering doubts. Maybe it still is. Maybe there's a way to explain all of the rest of these things. Who knows?
Yeah. Now, after this scene, they take Terry Maitland to be arraigned. And it's a big public event. There's media there. There's townspeople. There's people that believe he's innocent. There's more people that believe he's guilty. And it's, it's a madhouse in front of the courtroom.
Well, and let's pause to speculate or remember, I suppose, that the reason that this is such a big deal, number one, it's a small town, but number two, Ralph did this himself. He did this himself by creating the spectacle of arresting Terry in front of the entire town and creating this kind of sideshow, carnival atmosphere around what's happening with Terry. So, in some ways, this is definitely a monster that Ralph made himself.
Yeah, definitely. A monster is a good way of looking at it. So, and then, okay, just as a side note, as having read the book, this scene is so well written.
Yeah.
You really feel like you're there. Just the way he threw the kitchen sink at writing this particular scene and how it all plays out. And the way it plays out is Terry Maitland is shot and killed. And we find out is by Freddie Peterson's brother, Ollie.
Ollie, right.
Yeah. So that happens in this particular episode.
And let's not forget that there was actual conversation about Terry Maitland wearing a bulletproof vest. And ultimately, they chose not to. Wow. I thought only hindsight wasn't 2020.
Yeah. Was that did they do the bulletproof vest thing in the TV show?
Maybe I am confusing the two.
Yeah,
maybe
that was the novel.
Maybe that was just the book.
Yeah, in the novel, they made this big thing about him turning down the bulletproof vest. Which
right.
But see, though, in this one, though, he was shot like in the neck or something. So
he was shot in the neck, right? Yeah,
it wouldn't have mattered. So
wouldn't have helped him.
And as he is dying, he makes the declaration that he did not do this. He wants that the last thing that while he's on this earth to be said is that he did not kill Frankie Peterson, which is a big deal, you know, because you're dying. Most people, they want absolution declaration or whatnot, and he's saying, "I did not do this." So, which means a lot, you know.
Well, I think it means a lot to Ralph, who is experienced in this, perhaps, not exactly this thing, but experienced enough as a seasoned police officer to know that the dying declaration of either a victim or a perpetrator is immensely important. So just from that standpoint, I think that it was very significant for Ralph to hear that.
Yeah. So that is, obviously the fallout because of this is that Ralph Anderson is forced to take a leave because he murders Ollie, and he has to kill him to put him down.
Right.
So which is that's something that especially in a small town. I'm assuming that there's not many situations where you have to murder somebody. So they want to make sure that his mental is right, which ends up happening is they're forced to bring back a detective who has been on leave, and that is when we're first introduced to Jack Hoskins.
Right.
He's hunting boar. This dude is happy. He's hunting boar, and he's on vacation. He gets his text and needs you back ASAP. So he's pissed, right? So just as a side note, Ralph Anderson and Jack Hoskins don't have a great relationship with each other. So
No.
yeah, they're kind of rivals, and Jack Hoskins is kind of, he's pretty much shown to be he's not as buttoned up as as Ralph, to say the least.
I think Ralph actually looks at him like just sort of plainly, you're a dick. I don't think there's any nice sugarcoating way to say he just doesn't like him. I think for actually some pretty good reasons.
Mm-hmm. And a character we didn't talk about in the pilot, and as the story goes on, I'm sure we'll have to talk about him more, is Detective Yun Sablo. Right. So as this story is going along, he becomes more and more a factor in this story. Also in the book as well. So more so than the TV show. So this is him right here. So he was in the first episode. We just didn't talk about him because he really had a small part in the pilot. So let's kind of talk about, because we kind of breezed through it, and I think it deserves a lot more than what we just gave it. Terry Maitland is murdered very early on. So, if you didn't know, and you're like, oh, okay, this is going to be a Justin Bateman TV show.
Right.
He's already dead at the beginning of the second episode. And, and he directed, to let people know, he directed the first two episodes and he did a fantastic job. What do you think about them killing him off so fast?
Well, I have to say that full disclosure, again, just to go back to it, of course, I did read the book before I ever even saw this, so I knew sort of what was going to happen. But if I hadn't, that was actually really jarring. I mean, just putting myself in the position of not knowing the material ahead of time, it really did feel very jarring. Like, for two reasons. One, oh my God, there's no chance to sort of have Terry be able to redeem himself through his own volition. There's no, what is the best that can happen now? There's no redemption for him at all. That felt very like, wow, the stakes suddenly just went up a whole lot. But it also, I feel like, shifted all of the attention away from of it being kind of like a whodunit to clear Terry, and more of a, okay, well, wait, if something's happening, what is happening? What, like, it became more of a investigation because the investigation needed to happen, and less of a, hey, did Terry do it? Right? Do you know what I'm saying?
Right. No, yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm not on screen. Yeah. So, and it really, if you didn't know, it's definitely jarring because, one is he's a big star. So it's
Right.
it's kind of a psycho type thing where it's like, wait a minute, he's already gone, from this. And, he's a big part of the production part of it too. So, so that was definitely jarring. And, and it happens a little later in the book. I'd say more at the halfway mark. So they did it a little early, but it seemed it worked very well when the placement of it.
Something, not to compare this with any other series, but in some ways, this reminds me a bit of sort of the kind of interesting timing that True Detective had, which
Mhm.
was another HBO piece where, the timing sometimes feels a little bit strange, but in the end, it really works to the overall benefit of the narrative. And here, just in the first two episodes, again, because they aired them back to back, it does seem like airing them back to back gave us an opportunity to watch what was happening without having the interruption um kind of wondering what might be next. And so when they kill Terry off after that first, after we find out what, is kind of, well, maybe there's questions, maybe there's a good reason. How could he be in two places at one time, and all of that? Um, the thing that sort of happens then is we end up with this very unresolved, open-ended storyline, and that, I think, is what sort of drew people in, right? Because without Terry's death to start, it does feel like it might, I don't know if meander is the right word, but it feels like it might drag out a little bit too long. And I think that actually, if they had done what they did in the book in terms of the series, I feel like we might not have, it might not have kept people as interested.
Right. No, yeah, I agree. They did it at the perfect time and whatnot. One of the things that happened when Terry is murdered, then we have Ollie is murdered as well. So now Ollie's mother, who we didn't say, she had a heart attack and died.
Right.
Ollie's dead. Frankie or Fred, I'm sorry, it's Frankie Peterson, the victim that
Yep.
kicked it off, died. And then now we have the last person left is Fred Peterson, the father,
Right.
and he hangs himself in a very vicious way. I mean, where he busts through the window, and there's a jogger that sees it, and it was one of those images that they put in the trailer for the series, and it's it definitely serves as it is really sad as well.
Yeah, it's sad, and it's also, again, it's one of those very jarring things that makes you feel like the stakes are so incredibly high here, but it also adds this sense of pervasive, just absolute, sort of everywhere in every nook and cranny, grief and sadness. Something just so horrible is just so all consuming that it literally decimates an entire family. That, I feel like, is, that's not something that you see every day. It's not something you experience every day. It's something that really feels like, wow, there's a lot of impact here.
Yeah. Now, when he kills himself, hangs himself, and we didn't talk about it in the pilot episode, that there is a hooded figure that we see
Right.
at the Maitland house when they were doing the search.
Right.
You see this hooded figure once again, and I'll put him up on the screen there. And he seems to be there Sorry about that. He seems to be there scoping out the what's going on, and this hooded figure obviously has something to do. And he was also at the courthouse as well. The hooded figure. So, dun dun dun. Who could that hooded figure be? Possibly the outsider. So, obviously, the show is called The Outsider, and if you see the poster, the outsider looks like some kind of creature or something. So I don't think we're spoiling much by saying that maybe this hooded figure is in fact somebody who is involved in this in some way or form. Obviously, we don't want to spoil it because we know a little more than at this point. But as as someone who's read the book and obviously seen episodes beyond episode 2, talk about the hooded figure, showing the hooded figure a couple of times early on. Like, how do you like that?
Well, I actually, first of all, I actually kind of like the idea that there was this kind of open-ended, shadowy figure is not even really the right word, just this kind of ambiguous presence that exists that we have an inkling that, oh, hey, this might be part of the reason that there are so many questions, but also the idea of the hooded figure is such an awesome, to go back to what I was saying before, it's such an awesome trope because it's so sort of unexpected, but at the same time that it's unexpected, it's also one of those things that's like, it foreshadows so much. It foreshadows the idea that you, number one, don't know the identity, but number two, that there is something sinister about what is happening there that not just isn't explained, but that has some very strong energy attached to it. I actually really liked the way that they did that because it really helped us to feel like there is a connection.
We have in the chat, someone says, you didn't read the book. Yes, I read the book, just finished the book yesterday. But
we are talking about just the series.
Yeah, we're trying to not spoil the book or the TV show. We did a whole book review where we talked in depth about the novel. So yeah, we both read the book and we're very much aware. So we're trying to tightrope on what we know, and without, we want people who are not that far ahead to not, be put off by getting information too early. So we're just talking about episode 2 of the television series. So, but yes, I did read the book. But anyway, and talking about the book, by the way, so since this person wants to challenge my knowledge of the novel, this character, Merlin, is totally from the book. And Merlin is an interesting character, is someone who's suffered quite a bit due to the fact that he was abused and whatnot, and stole the van in which our doppelganger was driving, and left it there from, I believe he stole it in Dayton and ended up in Flint City. So they are in this point of the story, both Ralph and Sablo are talking to Merlin and getting more information on the van. Remember, Terry Maitland says that he didn't never seen the van ever. So,
right, and this is where there's like this disconnect between what we know as reality and what appears to be sort of happening on the peripheral edge. Because again, this idea that not everything can possibly be the truth seems to come into sharp play. And now we as the viewers understand that there is something more insidious happening. But I feel like if you're putting yourself into the character's position, just understanding that there are now a set of circumstances which both tie Terry to different locations, which we'll hear about, because of what we hear in this episode in terms of the barbecue that they were at, and then the scratch that he gets from when he visited his dad. Those things begin to thread the needle of, hey, here's what's going on. Why do we think these things are connected, and how are these things connected? Again, from the character's perspective, it must be really disconcerting. But from our standpoint, we can't even understand what's really going on, because how can all of this sort of be happening? How can all of this make sense? And clearly some stuff just doesn't make sense right now.
And just as a side note, going back to the book, I love the character Merlin in the book. It was, very, very good character, and is not played up as much in this, but he does have a significant part in the storyline and getting you to there, to filling in some blanks. I would also say, when it comes to the way that they've told the story, they've done a great job of moving the threads around so that it comes through really nicely. So, kudos once again to the writers of the show.
It definitely unravels a bit differently in the series than it did in the book, but there are some, I think, important visual narrative things that happen in the series that give us perhaps even more insight than the book does. And again, the book is a lot of tell. The show is the series is a lot of show. So we don't get, obviously, internal monologue, and we don't get a lot of the same character dialogue as we do in the book that is in the show. But the show does a really good job of being very careful about what they show us and how they show us this information. So it really does kind of feel like there's a lot happening, even when there isn't a lot. This series is very dialogue sparse, especially in the first couple of episodes. There is so little real big dialogue. It is so much more show us, show us, show us. And that, I think, also makes it very compelling.
Yeah. So another thing we have to talk about is when they're granted, when Ralph Anderson is granted a meeting with Glory Maitland,
Right.
and Howie Gold is there, and Alec Pelly. And so obviously Glory does not want this meeting. Ralph is mud to her, but she does it. She's convinced to do it. And so talk about this meeting and this idea of Ralph working with her and his defense team to potentially clear Terry's name posthumously.
Well, so this is where things both take sort of the strangest turns, and where we kind of get the information that I alluded to before, and where I feel like we sort of get an inside peek into Ralph's true thinking. Ralph's true thinking is everything needs to somehow linear make sense. There has to be some connection and some way to tie everyone together. And he has a difficult time making that work without visiting Glory, because he can't figure out how can all of these things sort of be happening? How can I make sense of these things that I'm hearing? How can I get from point A to point B? And when he goes to visit Glory, and she, tells him a bit of information. One of the beautiful things about this scene is Glory's absolute stoic body language and posture. There is something so closed off about even just her stilted dialogue with him. The conversation feels very almost staccato, as if, I'm not going to give you any information that you can then now use and go try to turn my husband into something worse than he already was, even if he's there with the clear understanding that no, I want to help. I'm trying to make sense of this, and if he didn't do it, how can we clear his name? I don't think at this point that Glory feels like that's what he's there for. It really feels like he's or it's that she's. Now, what happens though is the kid, Maya, explains that Terry got a cut on his wrist from a nurse at the hospital, scratch on his wrist from a nurse at the hospital. And that then also leads to another memory about the barbecue. And the barbecue plays a kind of prominent front and center in the whole unraveling of, who was where, when, and why. And it also gives us some threads, I think, in terms of us thinking, well, what actually really did happen here? How could he have gone from one place to another? And I know, if I hadn't read the book already, I would have been thinking to myself, well, maybe this isn't as, maybe it's not as clear cut as like I thought it was. Maybe Terry is involved, and maybe he didn't know he was involved. And that was immediately what I thought when I saw that scene. Like, maybe Terry had some involvement and he was like acting under the control of somebody else, and maybe he just didn't even think about it or something like that. The other thing that happens, and I think it happens in this episode, I don't think it's in the first episode, or maybe it is in the first episode, but we didn't talk about it, is that one of the kids sees this phantom apparition, which they all sort of say is, or explain away as, it's just her having bad dreams. And she says that this, whatever this is saying bad things about Terry, is saying bad things about, and I think that that's actually very important, because it directly speaks to the fact that whatever is happening here, it has a wider influence than maybe we even sort of felt like it could have had. It's not just the shadowy hooded figure. It's something else that's appearing to the kid. That seemed very important to me as well.
Yeah. And totally is in league with what happens in the book. So very similar. Not completely the same, but similar.
And remember that Glory saw the wet footprints on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And what was that about? Why were there wet footprints on the floor if it was just a bad dream? That, clearly Glory is even not she, which makes sense. Why would you think that anything strange was going on? You wouldn't. That's just not something that you would have in your head as being the first. If I wake up in the middle of the night and there's a strange sound or something unexplained is sort of happening, my first instant thought isn't, oh my God, there must be a demon in my house or something. I mean, it's, oh, a cat knocked something over, or my rational brain takes over and I think of something that, could possibly have caused it. And I think that was a really good visual cue for us that, okay, maybe she's ignoring some facts right in front of her face.
Right. All right. So let's get to the final part where we have the barn.
The barn. This is such a good scene.
The barn. And it's not the barn scene, which I believe is in the next episode, but it's the showing that the barn where clothes are found.
Right.
These are the clothes that Maitland was wearing when he was appearing to all these witnesses and stuff like that, the belt buckle and whatnot. So, to be continued. We're going to find out how does all that factor in. We'll talk more in depth in episode 3. So with all that said, let's go to you. How can we get you in social media and all that good stuff?
You can find me on Twitter at followingbliss1, and you can find my websites at criticallaughs.com, which is moving to studiowhitewolf.com, and moviesmakethemeal.com.
All right. And you can get me at Kinte F on Twitter, Kinte Ferguson on Instagram. And of course, the website is indyradio.org. That's INDY radio.org. And of course, we'll be back with an all new episode coming up soon of The Outsider. Peace.